The day I moved into my new apartment, I remember feeling a mix of excitement and loneliness. The latter was something I hadn't anticipated, having been so focused on the new beginning and the freedom it promised. That's when I decided to get a pet. Something to break the silence of my too quiet apartment. I settled on a parakeet, a vibrant little creature with feathers that shimmered like a gemstone under the store's fluorescent lights. I named her Echo. She was my splash of life in a place that still felt too new, too impersonal. In those first few weeks, Echo seemed just like any other bird. She chirped cheerfully during the day, occasionally mimicking sounds from her cage in the corner of my living room. My apartment, once echoing with the hollow sound of my own footsteps, now resonated with her lively presence. It was during a quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted my small living room in shades of gold and amber, that I first heard it. Echo, perched on her swing, cocked her head and in a voice much deeper than her usual chirps, uttered a phrase that chilled my blood. Aware of the hidden truths, she croaked in a tone that was gravelly and deep, a stark contrast to her usual melodious tweets. It was a voice I'd never heard before, a voice that certainly wasn't mine. In that moment, a shiver ran down my spine. I stared at Echo, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But the way she peered back at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before told me this was no trick of my imagination. That night, I lay in bed, the eerie echo of that unfamiliar voice haunting the edges of my mind. I told myself it was just a strange anomaly, a fluke in Echo's mimicry. Yet, somewhere deep inside, a seed of dread had been planted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly amiss. Over the next few days, Echo's behavior began to stray further from the ordinary. The phrases she spoke in that unrecognizable, deep voice became more frequent and increasingly unnerving. They never found the truth, she would mutter, or secrets lie beneath, always sending a chill down my spine. Each phrase felt like a piece of a puzzle I hadn't asked to solve, cryptic words that seemed to hint at something sinister. I started to wonder where she could have picked up such phrases. I certainly hadn't said them, and as far as I knew, neither had anyone who'd been in my apartment. Curiosity overcame my initial fear, and I began to delve into Echo's history. A visit back to the pet store provided the first piece of the puzzle. The owner, a kindly old man with a fondness for all his creatures, remembered Echo well. Oh, yes, Echo. She came from an estate sale not too far from here. Belonged to an elderly gentleman who lived in your apartment complex, I believe. Passed away some months ago. Quiet fellow, kept to himself mostly. That information sent a fresh wave of unease through me. The previous owner of my bird had lived in my building. And he had died. The coincidence was unsettling. That night, the apartment felt different. The walls seemed to close in on me, and every creak and groan of the building sounded more ominous than before. Echo's cage, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a harbinger of secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Echo's strange phrases continued, each one more chilling than the last. Hidden in plain sight, she croaked one evening, her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that felt almost human. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions about the previous owner, and what secrets Echo might be trying to reveal. It felt as though the apartment itself was hiding something that had been waiting quietly in the shadows, biding its time. The once comforting solitude of my apartment had been replaced with a sense of being watched, of not being alone. I could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes on me, and in the quiet hours of the night, I would sometimes catch myself listening intently, half expecting to hear a whisper in the dark that wasn't Echo's. My life began to revolve around the mystery of Echo's phrases. I spent hours researching the history of my apartment complex, delving into local news archives for any scrap of information about the previous owner. His name was Harold, and he had lived a reclusive life, rarely interacting with other residents. The cause of his death was ruled as natural, but the articles offered little else. Meanwhile, Echo's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. She would often stare at specific corners of the apartment, her gaze fixed and unblinking, or react to noises I couldn't hear. It was as though she was attuned to something beyond my perception, something lurking just beneath the surface of my mundane existence. One particularly unsettling incident occurred late one evening. I awoke to find Echo out of her cage, perched on the windowsill, staring intently at the moonlit sky. She turned to me and in that deep gravelly voice said, "The walls speak of hidden sins." I had never let her out of her cage at night, and the window had been securely closed. I couldn't explain how she got there. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I started a thorough inspection of my apartment. That's when I discovered something chilling. Behind a loose panel in the living room wall, there was a hidden compartment. Inside, I found various old items, a dusty fedora, a faded photograph of a woman I didn't recognize, and, most disturbingly, a leather-bound diary. The diary belonged to Harold. Its pages were filled with ramblings about conspiracies, hidden treasures, and betrayals. It painted a picture of a man consumed by paranoia and loneliness. But one entry stood out. It detailed an argument Harold had with another resident, a dispute over something valuable that was supposedly hidden in the building. As I read, Echo's voice echoed in my head, "They never found the truth." The realization hit me like a cold wave was Echo repeating Harold's last thoughts, his fears and obsessions. The apartment felt even more oppressive after that discovery. Shadows seemed to linger longer, and the silence was heavier. Echo's cryptic phrases became a constant eerie soundtrack to my life. It was as if the bird and the apartment were sharing a secret, a dark truth that was slowly unraveling before me. Then, things started to happen that I couldn't just explain away. Objects in my apartment began to move seemingly on their own. Doors would open and close without any reason, and I would often catch glimpses of something or someone out of the corner of my eye. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, a side effect of the stress and sleepless nights, but deep down, I knew it was something more. Something connected to Harold, to Echo, and to the secrets that were buried within these walls. It was a stormy night when the pieces of this horrifying puzzle finally fell into place. Echo was more agitated than usual, her feathers ruffled, her eyes darting around the room as if tracking unseen movements. Then, amidst the howling wind and rain, she spoke in that deep, unfamiliar voice, but this time the message was shockingly clear. Beneath the floorboards, truth lies buried. Driven by a mix of fear and desperation, I pried up the floorboards in the corner of my living room, where Echo often stared. What I found there made my heart stop. A small, rusted metal box, its contents a testament to a hidden past. Inside the box were old letters, newspaper clippings about a missing woman, and a small blood-stained knife. The letters were written by Harold to the woman in the photograph I'd found earlier. They spoke of a forbidden affair, a planned elopement, and a betrayal that ended in tragedy. As I pieced together the story from these fragments, Echo's role in this macabre tale became horrifyingly clear. She was mimicking not just Harold's voice, but his last moments of madness and guilt. The phrases she uttered were his confessions, his fears, his warnings. I felt a chill run down my spine as the realization dawned on me. Harold had been involved in something terrible, something that had ended in violence. And now, it seemed his restless spirit had found a voice through Echo. The apartment was no longer just a living space, it felt like a tomb, a place where the echoes of a long-forgotten crime lingered in the air. I could almost feel Harold's presence, his guilt and paranoia permeating every corner of the room. In a panic, I tried to leave, to escape the oppressive atmosphere and the chilling revelations. But as I reached for the door, it slammed shut on its own, the wind from the storm howling like a chorus of anguished spirits. I was trapped, surrounded by the remnants of a dark past that refused to stay buried. Echo's voice, now unmistakably Harold's, filled the room, repeating the same phrase over and over. Beneath the floorboards, truth lies buried. It was a mantra, a confession, a curse that bound me to this place of secrets and lies. I realized then that I was not just living in an apartment, I was living in the aftermath of Harold's tormented soul, a soul that had found a way to speak from beyond the grave, through Echo. The horror of my situation was overwhelming, and I knew that I had to find a way to break free from this nightmare, to silence the echoes of the unheard that haunted me. In the wake of the harrowing discovery, the apartment felt more like a prison than a home. The air was thick with the residue of Harold's secret, and Echo's incessant repetition of his last words only deepened the sense of dread. It was as if the bird, and through her, Harold himself, were holding me captive in this narrative of guilt and sorrow. Determined to free both myself and Echo from this haunting, I delved further into Harold's diary. The more I read, the more the story of a man tormented by his own actions unfolded. Harold had loved deeply, but his love was tainted with jealousy and rage. The woman in the photograph, it turned out, was a local who had disappeared years ago, her fate a mystery to the town. The realization that I was living in the same space where such a tragic tale had unfolded made my skin crawl. Echo's phrases now made sense. They were the outpourings of Harold's guilt-ridden psyche. But knowing this only made the situation more unbearable. The apartment felt contaminated by the past, every corner whispering secrets of the long dead. I started to experience more inexplicable occurrences. Lights would flicker without cause, cold drafts appeared from nowhere, and I often heard faint whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. It was as if Harold's restless spirit had been stirred up by my discoveries, his presence growing stronger by the day. In a desperate attempt to rid myself and my home of this haunting, I gathered Harold's belongings, the diary, the letters, the photograph, and the knife, and decided to remove them from the apartment. My hope was that by doing so, I could also dispel the spirit that seemed to cling to them. As I carried these items out, Echo became frantic, fluttering around her cage as if in a panic. Her voice, now unmistakably Harold's, grew louder, more insistent. It was as if she was trying to stop me, to keep the secrets and the spirit they harbored within these walls. Ignoring Echo's protests, I left the apartment, the items in tow. The night air felt like a cleansing breath, compared to the stifling atmosphere I had left behind. I buried Harold's possessions in a secluded spot in the nearby woods, hoping that by doing so, I would also bury his tormented spirit and the dark past it represented. Returning to the apartment, I felt a slight easing of the oppressive atmosphere, but it was clear that something still lingered. Echo was silent now, her eyes following me with an intelligence that seemed far beyond that of a mere bird. I knew then that while I might have quieted Harold's spirit, I hadn't completely eradicated its presence. That night, I lay awake, contemplating my next move. Leaving the apartment seemed the only option, but a part of me felt responsible for Echo, for the strange bond she had formed with Harold's spirit. I was caught in a dilemma, torn between the desire to escape and the need to resolve this haunting once and for all. The decision to leave the apartment came to me not in a moment of fear, but rather in a moment of clarity. As dawn broke, casting a soft light into my once cherished living space, I realized that some secrets are too heavy for one person to bear. The echoes of Harold's troubled past, now interwoven with my own life through Echo, were a burden I could no longer shoulder. I packed my belongings, each item feeling heavier than the last, as if I were also packing away the memories and fears of the past weeks. Echo, silent now, watched me with those knowing eyes. There was an understanding in her gaze, a recognition that our time together was at an end. As I prepared to leave, I opened Echo's cage for the last time. "You're free now, Echo," I whispered, but she made no move to leave her familiar perch. It was as if she, too, had become a part of this place, a guardian of the secrets that the walls held. With one last look at the apartment, I closed the door behind me, leaving Echo and the remnants of Harold's spirit behind. The decision to leave her was heart-wrenching, but I knew it was for the best. Echo was no longer just a bird, she had become a vessel for something much larger and darker than herself. As I walked away from the building, the weight on my shoulders began to lift. The sun's rays felt warm and comforting, a stark contrast to the chill of the haunted apartment. Yet, even as I moved on, a part of me remained vigilant, looking over my shoulder, half expecting to hear Echo's voice or see a shadow from the past. The story of Echo and the secrets she revealed would stay with me, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the present and the past, the living and the dead. Though I had left the physical space of the apartment, the echoes of the unheard would linger in the corners of my mind, a whispering presence that would never fully fade. And so, I started anew, in a different place, under a different sky. But the experience had changed me. No longer would I view the world with the same innocence. I had looked into the heart of a mystery, and in doing so, I had glimpsed the shadowy depths that lie beneath the surface of our everyday lives. Echo's voice, and the secrets it carried, would forever be a part of me, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that shape our destinies.